To explore the frontiers of the Apple Vision Pro, I had to bring in somebody with a lot more experience than me, since I'm still a little bit of a newbie in the spatial computing. So I've got Gregory Weber here. Great to meet you, Gregory. I mean, we haven't really chatted before, but we've been talking on Twitter a bit. So
it's great to meet you as well. It's one of the things that's been fun about this is that it's a very small community still, and getting to meet a lot of interesting people. So I was glad that you reached out, and happy to be here with you today.
Yeah, and I think that was when I kind of just expressed interest in wanting to create immersive spaces, because or experiences or videos or whatever it's going to be. That's what we're going to get into today, is like what possibilities are there for creators, both in the present and the future for the Vision Pro. But you're the perfect person to talk to about it because you've already been doing that. So your company Apposite has been making since the beginning of the Vision Pro. You've already been in there, and you might be best known for Vibescape, which if anybody hasn't tried, or for everybody that hasn't tried it, because a lot of, let's assume most people listening don't have an Apple Vision Pro. It's just being launched internationally. So I'm gonna, I know some of you out there will have tried it, but many won't. But yeah, Vibescape is a meditation app most of all, where you can be in an immersive experience. It's all inspired by the Pacific Northwest. And so this is perfect because you've already been one of the few people creating an environment like this, and both digitally and with photography, using your background in both developing and creative arts to bring it all together. So I want to know both like how you did it, what that experience is like, and what you see going to the future. But first, just give me a little bit of your background. How did you get into developing for Apple products?
So I got into app development in 2010. I kind of felt like I had missed the iPhone wave, and the iPad came out, and I was like, I don't want to miss out again. So I got into making a music app called Polychord, which has been used by a lot of bands. It was an Apple staff favorite and did really well at the time when it launched. And I kind of just did the indie development thing for a while. It ended up becoming a career, ended up at Google for about 8 years. And then when they announced Vision Pro last year, it was like, well, this feels like the same moment again. It's like the iPad came out. If people don't remember, no one was quite sure if it was actually going to be a successful device. People weren't sure what to think of it.
I mean, it's the same with the iPhone too. Like every new platform has had that.
Yeah, on the anniversary of that, we saw some of the funny takes at the time from people who were like, yeah, why would people get this? And so it felt like a similar moment to me, where you have this niche thing that not a lot of people are thinking about yet. And to me, that's more fun. It's like this, it's a sandbox where you get to actually shape what it's going to be a little bit, rather than just jumping onto this established platform. And
I'll also note, I mean, you were extremely early to this, but anybody listening, it's still so early to this. We're just getting it internationally. It's the first few months. Think back to like what was 5 months into the iPhone. Really, we were still using fart apps and beer drinking simulators.
Yeah, the beer.
So we're still just really figuring this out. So it's very early days.
That's a great point. I mean, there wasn't even an app store at first. It was like they were going to be web apps, and I think the developers at Apple convinced Steve Jobs at the time, like, hey, we can actually run Objective-C apps on this. And Vision Pro in many ways is further along than that, because it does have an app store. It has content. And I'm curious too, because from what I gather, you do a lot of filmmaking content. And I know you've had a lot of questions about this as a medium. So that's one thing I'm excited to talk to you about today, as well as I have this app developer perspective of it, but I'm excited to kind of chat a little bit too about somebody who's coming at it from a different angle.
Well, and so many of the challenges that we're going to run up to in this conversation is like, I want to talk about it as much as I can in the present, because, this is a product that is here now. You can go and buy it, but it also in some ways is a product living in the future. And a lot of the way that we think about it is, what can this be? What could this be? Because so much of it still needs to happen. We've already seen how fast it's moving. The new Vision OS 2 is coming soon. I know you've been able to play with it. I'm still just running the version 1, and there is so much that is about to change about this whole platform the next 2 years. But let's start off with some practical stuff first of all, just from a consumption perspective, for, again, anybody that hasn't tried it, maybe the thing I'll just keep pushing in this video the most often is that you should just go try it. It's a very hard product to recommend people just buy because it's version 1 and it's crazy expensive and there's not, that many apps for it yet. This is for early adopters. Like, you've got to be confident that with the way, like, the money is available and you can do something with it now. That's who should be buying it. But I think everybody who's interested should at least be trying it and seeing, is this a compelling experience for you? Like, do you enjoy it? Because I don't know, there's so much about this that is an experience that discussing it, showing it, watching videos of it really does not do that much. Like, you cannot tell what the experience is like until you've put it on.
That's one of the most challenging things about it is, I mean, we live in a world that is 3D, but when you show somebody on a 2D medium and you show them something on social media, it's almost impossible to convey a lot of the experience, because you really, like you said, you do have to experience it yourself. I personally, I'm very happy that Apple went with making this. It feels like they handed us a device from the future. So I'm glad they didn't give us a cheap version. There's this Alan Kay quote that's something like, the future, if you want to develop for some future platform, you kind of need to be a little bit ahead in what computing power you're using today, right? And so even if you go back to like the 90s when they were using Silicon graphics machines to make Super Nintendo games, it's like you kind of have to go a little bit further out, use a little bit beefier horsepower technology to allow people to start creating the experiences, because I do think, at least what I'm betting on, is this will become more mass market as it gets lighter, as it gets cheaper, and the apps will be there because people got the chance to play with the future now and see what it's like. And so in terms of, you're going to see this week when you play around with it. It's pretty cool to see the international launch happening and all these new people getting to experience it. But I think for me, as a user of the platform, the thing that surprised me the most is the photos experience. It sounds really simple, but looking at just my own photo library and looking at stuff I haven't looked at in years, from trips I took with my wife or pictures of my kids when they were little. And they don't even have to be, I'm talking about stuff I shot on an iPhone 3 maybe in Paris like 10 years ago. And something about seeing them in the device, there's a level of immersiveness that's very overwhelmingly emotional, for lack of a better way to describe it. It's just really striking how, when you're looking at photos in the device, I think about that Mad Men carousel pitch that Don Draper did, where it's just like everything about these memories you're looking at is heightened somehow. And I'm pretty fascinated by like what's going on there psychologically, that something about seeing, because they're not even necessarily, I know this is beta stuff, but there's this new feature in the beta where you can convert your two-dimensional photos into stereoscopic photos. That's pretty wild. We could talk about that. But even just flat photos that you took a long time ago, panoramas, for instance, something overwhelmingly emotional about that experience that's pretty wild. And I think, like, you get it, you put your photos on there, you can spend a few days just in there messing around with that.
Well, I think there's an element that we don't print our photos that big. Like, how often do you see any of your work 10 feet tall?
That's
like,
right.
that you can walk right up to it. And obviously you can zoom into 100% on a monitor, but it does just feel different when you perceive it as large.
That's right.
Or that you are, if you're using one of the environments, now you are in a space that allows you to focus in on the piece in front of you. And there's also, in the Apple demo that I had during WWDC, they're showing Art Universe, something like that, where you can just look at pieces of artwork in space. And
they actually did some beautiful localization, that particular app, in the Japanese and Chinese App Store launches that just happened. They've tailored the experience and in a really beautiful way. Just as an aside, like, I love what they did there.
No, it's great. And I mean, it's the same reason that going to a museum and seeing a piece large feels different than seeing a photo of it on the internet.
Well, the other aspect of this is the pass-through, because I find that when I'm working in it, you do forget that you're looking through a video and not the real world. And I kind of saw this coming with the AirPods Pro a few years ago, where it was like, oh, this is their first real augmented reality device. Because I'll walk around, we live on a farm here. I'm outside a lot, and sometimes I'll be listening to something while I'm doing work outside. And I forget sometimes that I'm not actually hearing the world directly. I'm hearing an audio signal, and there's this aha moment of like, oh, right, the sound design they're doing, the transparency mode, it's augmented reality, and Vision Pro in many ways is transparency mode for your eyes. And it's easy to forget at times, unless it's really late and it's grainy, but for the most part, you kind of forget that you're not directly seeing what's there after a while.
Well, we're on the AirPods Pro, though. I do want to expand on it a bit more because I think we're going to talk mostly, but we both mostly do visual creative stuff. But the spatial audio, I mean, when it was just, they added that to the music app and it was just available for just the AirPods, there was a bit of a reaction like, why are we doing this, right? I mean, it's not necessarily a better experience than listening to a stereo mix, just in terms of, fidelity of music, and it was less clear. Now, using spatial audio in the Vision Pro, so just before we started recording, I had my first, there's 3 other people in a FaceTime call, and this is with some people from Apple just kind of showing me around, and that was incredibly compelling. Like it was so convincing that they are sharing the space with you. The virtual personas, the visual aspect it's impressive for how early it is. It's not completely convincing. It's interesting, but what just blew me away was the sense that they are beside you and near you and in the same space as you, and that the audio adapts to the environment that you are inside of. And the audio plays such a big part of this. And I am realizing I need to start learning how to record and master spatial audio, because it's so great. I actually find it more interesting if it's part of video work, like if it's paired with the documentary. That seems more significant to me than music necessarily. Music works great in stereo in my world, but I do think if you're going to be showcasing the real world and trying to bring somebody in there, even if you're seeing a 2D image, spatial audio can really enhance that.
There's so many places like we could take this conversation. One thing I'll say on that, I released a game this month called Bossa Nova Bounce.
I saw that.
Balloon Frenzy. It's like a completely ridiculous name because the game is totally absurd. And while I was developing that game, you have these balloons. For anybody who hasn't seen it, which again, how many people have this device, right? It's the classic balloon game that any kid has played, that you've all played, where you just don't want the balloons to hit the ground. And so I built a game around that concept. And as I was developing it, one of the levers of difficulty in the game is that the balloons start out right in front of you, but then over time, they start to fall kind of in a circle around you, and at some point they're falling behind you, and it's not very fun or fair if a balloon appears behind you and you can't see it and it falls. But with spatial audio, you can actually, even without AirPods in, just the device itself, using spatial audio, I have like the sound of a balloon inflating, and because you hear it, to turn. And
right.
I found that really interesting as a developer, because it's like, you only discover stuff like that prototyping and building on the actual platform, and I never would have come up with that idea had I not been wearing the device testing things out. And it's just fun because it's like you hear the hiss of the balloon coming into the scene, you turn. Be careful if you play it, because I don't want people, I did
be in
spill
a wide open space
playing the game. Yeah, give yourself some room. And so spatial audio is incredible. And, like you said, as from filmmaking, I think the challenge here, like bringing it back to filmmaking for a second, is like every new medium, I think starts out by taking the old one that came before it and putting it on the new one. And so it's like radio, people just took plays and theater and then put it on the radio. And then early television was just people took radio shows and put them on TV. So anytime something new comes out, that kind of happens and it jump starts things. But then time passes and people start to come up with, what is this thing What is this new medium itself? What does it have to offer? So it's really cool to watch traditional media on the device. I mean, if you buy a laser projector to watch movies on, those aren't cheap either. So from like, if you are in the market for that sort of thing, that's one way to look at it. Is it's a great movie and photo device, right?
This is the best movie device I've had,
Yeah.
other than the fact that you're alone in it, which is significant, but
Right. If you have a family, you kind of
Yeah.
want everybody to be able to watch the movie together.
I'm somebody that I love movie theaters. And I feel like, I don't know, when I look at threads on Twitter right now, there's so many people that are like, we're better off without, my TV's big enough at home. Who needs the theater? And like the experience of it being social, that you did something with a group of people and later you can say, remember that time we went to that movie, and that it forces a level of focus so that you can't be multitasking in the theater. There's so many things about that
Absolutely.
experience that I think are, I love it. I absolutely love movie theaters. But this is the second best experience after that.
That's what's so interesting about immersion in general. Like, there is something about going to a theater in real life that puts you in a certain context, and it primes you for the experience you're about to have.
I remember movies I've seen in the theater so much better.
Right. Because the experience of going there, the people you saw it with, maybe the dinner you had afterwards, it all strengthens, I think, the memories of that night or whatever. And if you really love movies, I think like you kind of share that like love of theaters. I'll throw, because I have such a long list of app ideas, I'll throw out a funny one I had the other night. I was like watching somebody's amazing kind of 16 millimeter animations that they do and they post to Instagram. And I was like, I want to watch these right now in Vision Pro in kind of like a smoke filled art house cinema with some other people, and just like, it would be a fun way to watch these, because there's something about like the environment you're in informing the content you're watching. And I think that's kind of what's interesting, is that you have the platform as a opportunity for new media, like new types of, if you look at Apple's immersive TV stuff, for example, some of that stuff's mind-blowing. Like I love basketball, but I've never actually been to an NBA game. And if you watch Apple's immersive trailer, there's some sports moments in there that are pretty wild.
Okay, we've got to get to this, because
yeah.
I've been thinking about this so much.
Yeah.
I don't care about sports. Like, I'm not a sports guy. Really at all. I just don't watch anything. That trailer totally sells me on like, maybe I want to start watching sports. Like
Right.
all the football stuff was really amazing. The celebrations in the change rooms afterwards, like the locker room party shots, like everything became so much more heightened and visceral, and like and even more so than when I've been to games in real life. I don't know, I've been like NBA and NHL games. I'm always, I've like seats 50 feet back, 100 feet back, however far away I am. And like, it's, mostly, a lot of it's more about socializing, but the game is still at a distance, even if I'm actually there. Once you're on the court or you're in the net, I mean, it really is so much more exciting. And I would watch some sports in this.
Absolutely. Like to see LeBron James come down the court and dunk a basketball, it's just like, oh, wow. Right. Yeah. Like you touched on something there, which is interesting, which is like the intimacy of this media. I think it's called Highline, which is one of the shorts that Apple put out about somebody who goes to, maybe it's Norway, to these massive cliffs, and they do this essentially tightrope walking, which is called highlining, I guess. And some of the first shots, you're so close to this person that it's almost jarring, because you're like, I almost feel like I'm invading this person's personal space. I'm so close to them.
I don't want to knock them off the wire.
And I don't want to knock them off the wire. And there's some, and like you said, so when you're in the locker room and you see the team celebrating and you're like right there with them, it's something I've never experienced in real life. It's just fascinating.
And again, this keeps driving that idea home of like, go try this. Just watch that trailer. That's
the trailer alone. Yeah.
I think that's what I would show most people that have no interest in the Vision Pro, which, I'll just say out of my normal life, friends and family, nobody is interested in it really. Like, I think mainstream non-tech people, it isn't like, I guess iPhone was like that in the first year or two. Normal people didn't really care. Like, I don't have people like that are like wishing to try it that much. And even I feel like having the demos have been available in the States for 5 months, and there's still a lot of people I know I've heard from that still haven't tried it in that time. And, I think that'll gradually shift. And I also want to, I feel like I have to say so much because this is my first time really talking about it since the announcement. I've like, infinite ideas here, but I also don't want to feel like I'm pitching that this like should be the future of computing either. Like, I'm not an advocate of spatial computing. I'm mostly saying that my first response to using it is like, this adds more than I expected to using a computer. Not necessarily in the way of like, obviously we've all seen Ready Player One, so our imaginations go there of like, you can live in the metaverse. And I think it's a huge part of the mistake of what, Mark Zuckerberg's vision was expressed as, is like, you're going to live in here. Like, this will be, we're your home now. It's like, is that compelling to anyone? Like, that freaks out everyone I've talked to. Nobody likes that that concept of it. So now, having used it a little more, what I'm really seeing is that as an extension of work that you're already doing, it's really interesting. As a better than usual way to consume either existing media or new forms of media, it's really impressive, very compelling. And how that fits into our like day-to-day computing life, I'm totally still unsure. I'm still not sure if this will be a mainstream thing. This is the first time I put on VR glasses and be like, oh yeah, this is so functional. Like, this is what you imagine it should be like.
Yeah, and I mean, stepping back and remembering that you're seeing this for the first time and many countries are just getting this thing. I mean, thinking back to when I first put it on, the very first thing you have is an onboarding, which I joked is sort of, it's like if Brian Eno art directed an eye exam. It's like the most pleasant thing, and you're just setting it up. And it's from that moment, the Apple logo appearing in your room, and then the cursive hello, welcome, it immediately sets the stage for like, oh wow, I haven't experienced anything like this before. And I've tried glasses in the past, and I've always been interested in that, but you can see how this is a pitch for a new type of computing. And like you said, not everybody is sure why we need that yet. And with phones, people already had been using phones for a long time, right? And people have been watching 2D content for a long time. Maybe they've seen 3D movies, but again, that's still, I would say, a very different type of experience. What will be interesting over the next couple of years is like stepping back, I guess the metaphor is when 3D animation first came out, one of the things people love to do is just put in a lot of hyper camera movements, and I guess a lot of people still do that in some big movies today, but some people tend to overuse that stuff, right? And a lot of times restraint is actually a good thing. And so it's interesting to look at how the OS is just trying to be a computer and not necessarily changing everything you know about computers. It's very iPad-like when you're in it.
Let's talk about that experience a bit of just using it in a computer context. You've probably done a lot of that with developing. That was a lot of the first things I did. Was I would connect it to my Mac, use it as a big portable screen for work I was already doing in a 2D environment. And the nice thing is, as long as you're using a trackpad, which actually made this mistake first, that a mouse will not move out of your Mac into the Vision Pro space. So you do need to have a trackpad available to have that connection.
Oh, interesting. I use a trackpad, so I didn't realize that.
Right, yeah. So, just so you know, it is a pretty great experience that you can grab your messages and put them beside you over here, and you can grab your emails and they're here, and then in front of you is Lightroom or Final Cut Pro, and you're working there, and you can look left and right, and maybe your podcasts are playing above you, and it works great. I mean, it's really nice, but almost what's frustrating about it is that you have like two working experiences. I started feeling this right away. As soon as I then turn it all off and now I'm back to just my computer, I have to reset my spatial perception of like, where are messages? Oh, they're actually on my smaller screen over to my right. They're on my laptop screen to my right, or they're behind this window. And you're sort of relearning that behavior. And it's like, oh, I have to stop reaching into the air and pinching things.
Right.
So you're really moving between two. It's almost like switching between Mac and Windows, where your keyboard shortcuts don't work anymore, right? Like you build up a little muscle memory, and you're like working through a flow. But if you're not going to be wearing vision glasses all day, which at this moment most people wouldn't, you have to have sort of two modes of running your computer. I don't know. That's kind of what I perceived in my first time actually working in that space.
I was surprised at how many things worked intuitively, that, you know, it's like all this continuity stuff's been happening for a while with Apple devices, and I forget it's there sometimes, right? It's really hard when you're making apps to make certain things discoverable. And the fact that you can Command V on one machine and then paste on your iPhone, like, I'm really deep in this stuff and I forget it that you could do it. And when I did that,
is like, this explains continuity, like why this isn't why they've been doing continuity, but this like sells it when you're like, oh yeah, I can like go from my phone to the Vision Pro to the Mac, and it's all in the same physical space, and like it really connects now. And spatial, like, it's all these things that Apple was doing that seemed like interesting little add-ons now feel necessary. And actually, what's the word for when you move your mouse and you push through the side and it could connect to your iPad as a second display? Now it'll connect to your Vision Pro. Universal control? No, that's a different one.
I can't actually remember what the term for it is.
But all of a sudden, it's like, wow, this is useful.
It's interesting too, because you see the design decisions that were made. Like, there's no cursor floating in the air, but it does move from your Mac to the virtual windows on Vision Pro, and you're like, oh, okay, that's interesting that they did that, you know. Or the fact that you can then, and I've had the thing too where I'm watching our projector and I'm like doing this, I'm like, nope, I can't. It's like when we all started to try to pinch magazine photos when that stuff started to come out. They have such a long time horizon. The AR stuff never quite made sense to me, because I was like, who wants to just move their iPhone around and film stuff and see things on it? And now it's clear what that was leading to. I wonder too, I think it was the Isaacson biography of Steve Jobs, when right before he passed away, he had a quote of like, I finally cracked TV.
Right.
And I felt like I was waiting for a long time to see what that was, because I was like, was it this update to Apple TV? Like, it sounded pretty dramatic. And then
it was just one TV OS update that we've now forgotten about.
But now looking at the stories at that Vanity Fair piece on Tim Cook, where they talk about just how early on the first prototype of Vision Pro was, that I started to think maybe that's what he was talking about. You know, it's like the first, I think they said the first demo was like going onto the moon environment and watching something. So they deal in like decades long time horizons. I would say for any developers listening, that's a good reason why when they introduce a new technology, it's worth learning it, because they usually have like a good reason for bringing it into the mix. Yeah,
there was a lot of emphasis after WWDC, in the interviews, especially the talk show live, which anybody hasn't watched it, it's must viewing if you
those are always great
in what happens there, because there's always some great tidbits. And Craig is making a big emphasis on Apple's patience to be able to, everybody's like, Apple's behind in AI, like they don't know what they're doing, they're floundering, they're going to have to bring in a third party to do it, and meanwhile they're just working away at it in the background. And that ends up being true so often, is like Apple won't be the first to release something, and that can make it feel like they're way behind. But often it's that they're, they just kind of don't release most things until they're pretty much baked. Like they, like in this case, of course, like they had to make some call of like, is the Vision Pro compelling enough to sell right now? And no matter when they released it, whether it was last year or this year or next year, it still is, it's not a developer product. Like, it's not just for developers, but it's straddling that line, like it is especially for developers. Like, that's who it's like the most interesting for. Obviously early adopters, but it's they had to make some call of when are we going to just jump out and do this? And I feel like they hit a pretty good balance here, and that, like you say, their time horizons are incredibly long. So I think they're okay with this being a pretty like moderate success for a while. I don't think there's any, when I'm saying here that like most people shouldn't buy it, this isn't a product for everyone. I think they wouldn't say that, but they don't necessarily disagree with that, right? I think if this was a smash hit and everybody bought it, there would be a lot more people frustrated being like, why can't I do XYZ? Whereas by having a slightly more controlled or a smaller user base that are, I guess I'll say more sophisticated, like understand what they're buying a little bit more.
Yeah, like I think early adopters is a great way to put it, because that audience, they're more interested in jumping onto something that's new, knowing that it's I don't want to say work in progress altogether, but
It's
Apple's
the cutting
putting this
edge.
out
Like,
there.
it really is.
It's the cutting
a
edge,
taste of
right?
the future. Yeah.
And I don't think it's incorrect to say that Apple wants developers to help and content creators to help define what it's going to be. So if you're somebody who has the money to spend on getting a glimpse of the future, by all means do that. But yeah, it's worth understanding that part of that is for the developers, for the content creators to get it as an investment, right? And that's all up to individual risk tolerance. Like I said, for me, it's way too exciting to not jump on a new medium and to get to actually like shape it and figure out what's going to go on it. And when you have a device, you're going to get ideas you wouldn't if you were just kind of watching from the sidelines.
Well, so let's talk about that creative process a little bit. Something you've already got into, and I feel like giant barrier right now is that the people that can interact with the most creative output on the Vision Pro this year are developers, because there aren't that many user-generated type places to publish anything other than apps. Like there's the App Store, so if you build a full app, people can experience whatever it is you've created. But for me, as primarily a photo, video, audio creator, where do I publish? This has been the huge,
Right.
As soon as I had the demo and they mentioned the new Blackmagic camera that'd be able to shoot the immersive videos, I was like, yes, I'll do this. I want to make a documentary. I want to make whatever it takes. I want to make, I want to be the first immersive influencer that is doing travel content. But then as I'm sitting there thinking about, okay, if I buy this camera, let's say it's 20,000, where can I even put the content? I think I need a contract with Apple to put it in Apple TV. Like it needs to be commissioned by Apple is basically the way that anybody's going to see this work right now, which I would love, but not many people are going to get that. I'm probably not going to get it. So how can I even participate in this new ecosystem right now? Because there aren't big places to publish. And before we go too deep into it, I'll also make sure for anybody that isn't already clear about the differences, there are spatial photos and videos, and then there's immersive, which are both Apple branding terms. Spatial is stereoscopic, so it's just 3D. Like you go to a 3D movie, basically the same as that. They put their own touches on it, but more or less that's what you're seeing. And immersive is both 180, so it is all around you, but it is also 3D. The term for this before was VR 180, and I'm not clear how Apple's immersive video spec is different from VR 180 or if they are actually the same thing. But YouTube does support VR 180, so on other devices you could watch videos in that format. But because YouTube is not on the Vision Pro right now, you can't. So other than in the Apple TV app, I'm not or custom apps that have built an experience. Like where can I see user generated content?
Yeah, I haven't downloaded the update. I think the app is called Juno, and it's a third-party developers, right? And I think they just added support for viewing 180 content on there, which would be fun to check out. On that, the other very popular app is Beautiful Things, which is basically an app where you can download gorgeous USD files and look at them. And I think one of the reasons that's been successful is because it gives you content to look at, and it's really nice content, and it's a simple concept. But yeah, in terms of, if you're a studio and you can reach out to Apple and talk about the process for doing things for their immersive channel. I'm sure that's an avenue that's there. What I would love to see is something like a grant program so that people on lower budgets could get in on this too. Because I don't want to just see just the big names and companies making stuff. They'll make cool stuff, but I think there's going to be a lot of indie creators that, if they could get some funding, would make phenomenal things. But the best bet right now is if you could link up with an app developer and basically create your own platform and get in and start experimenting and try to find a fit with an audience.
It's just so challenging to, like you were saying, that sort of that risk of investment is what there isn't even a path to return on it yet, right? Like other than being early, you know?
Yeah, like so with Vibescape, initially the whole app was planned around spatial videos. I bought the 15 Pro Max iPhone because they had said that they would be enabling spatial video support on it. When I bought it, it didn't exist yet. I had to wait. But I got that because it was like I was putting the plan together. I was going to get the device, get the phone. And we've done all this conservation work here in the Pacific Northwest on our farm. And so the prompt for this whole idea was I wanted to share these landscapes with people and have them be able to see this stuff and appreciate it. And so the initial concept was going to be heavily around the spatial video. And once that became available on the iPhone, the timing worked out. There was this amazing ice storm, and I spent all weekend outside freezing with like my tripod and stuff and getting really beautiful shots of like our huge oak tree on the prairie and the ferns in the forest with ice coming down, and just grabbed all these great lockdown shots. And I did that because I didn't want to risk making people uncomfortable with moving cameras and stuff. So I did these lockdown shots, got some great content, put out the app. And what I found was that some people really appreciated those. Other people were hoping to see more just immersive stuff. Like they wanted to be fully in these spaces. I don't think they realized what kind of budget Apple's working with on their immersive environments, but that was sort of where the audience wanted to see the app go. And that's where I took it. And I put a lot of effort into then pivoting and putting more focus on that. However, I still think the video content's a really interesting avenue. And like you said, there's also this 180 immersive stuff, and that's more like what you see in Apple's content. And for that, you know, the thing to know about spatial video is it's more like I think it's like a 1080p format. And it's more of a consumer format, if to put it that way, right? It's like the stuff you'll shoot at the barbecue and send to your friends, and they'll eventually watch it as well. The 180 immersive stuff, you're getting into more of like an IMAX thing. And if I could like talk about this for just a second, like I think it's fascinating from a creation standpoint because you're talking about a ton of data, right? Like you have 4K in each eye. And if you've ever worked with film and video, you know how much like 4K already is like in terms of processing, storage, editing. Now you have things in your periphery you need to think about. You know, so if I go to the beach with this Blackmagic camera when it comes out and I set it up, now I have to think about, did people just like drive up over there? Are there houses over there? They're kind of like
that's
in
part of the
shot.
experience.
It's part of the experience, right? Like maybe you embrace that. But if you're trying to use traditional filmmaking tools, like now you have a lot of things to consider. So it's a big step up in terms of production value, but it is going to come with a lot of cost in terms of not just the cameras, but putting it all together and thinking about, you know, what you want the final thing to look like.
Well, like you were saying, your audience expressed that, you know, they wanted to go beyond spatial and dive into immersive. I'm in that exact same boat. I think immersive is what makes this compelling. Spatial to me is you can do it. So like, yeah, let's throw some content in there, but I wouldn't switch to a spatial lens just to create that. I wouldn't choose my camera just based on shooting spatial. It's not compelling enough to me. It's like, it's interesting the way that a 3D movie is. Like it does draw you a little bit more, but then you can also start to forget that you're seeing it in 3D after a few seconds. So, you know, you're touching on the machine learning spatial photos coming in Vision OS 2. I think those are going to, from everything I've heard, I haven't tried them yet. They sound amazing. Like that sounds really compelling to me. And that's the way to do it, I think. If machine learning has moved that fast, we will be there with video in not too long, I imagine. And I'd rather kind of just sit back, keep shooting 2D video the way that I do now, focus on the quality of that 2D experience. Maybe spatial will catch up with it in someday. But immersive that's the next step. And I completely hear what you're saying about how data intensive it is and the technical challenges, but I so clearly remember how recently 4K was a struggle. Like, my first 4K video, it was mostly for social media, so it wasn't going to be that big. It was for like a makeup brand that I was doing with Anya, but they wanted 4K to put in their window displays in the stores, and I was like, okay, I'll try it. So, I rented a Sony that had the ability to do it, and I did a 4K workflow, and it slowed my machine down like crazy. This just happened. This was just a few years ago, and now we're already like, oh, well, I don't know if I can do 4K per eye. So it is challenging right now, but it's that same technical overhang where it's like, we'll get there pretty soon, and it's so worth it to me. I really think that's the jump that's exciting, which obviously you've been doing it, so...
Yeah, I agree. Like you said, now we're shooting 4K on our phone. And then we found, oh, well, I'm going to shoot in 4K even if it's not going to end up there because it gives me the flexibility. And that's the cool thing about computers. They get cheaper and faster and storage goes down in price. And the distinction I want to make for people who aren't like super into this stuff is the difference. So when I talk about like Vibescapes, immersive environments, these are... So my approach is a hybrid of using very high quality photo assets with 3D modeled assets and creating something that is a hybrid of procedural and things scanned. So I'm actually going out, I'm scanning things using photogrammetry. I'm creating essentially sets that you can go into and be in these places. That's one approach for creating immersive. Then there is what we're talking about now, which is a kind of a specific format that is sort of this IMAX style. And I don't want to it's really Apple's format, right? But just for people who've never experienced it, it's a big wraparound film format that's both stereoscopic, but also wide enough that you feel like you're in it.
Everybody should check out the video that you put together about how you did Vibescapes, because I found that very useful to see some of the construction of those digital sets. And you produced the video really well too. So I'll include a link in the show notes to that. Thank you. Because, and I'd also just love to know more about it because it looks incredibly like it was a lot of work and paid off. So I just think it's really cool that you're able to actually put that together.
I think I said this earlier. Visual effects were the inspiration for me to even touch a computer in the first place. And I think what's so fun about filmmaking and visual effects in general, I'll put it this way. I think James Cameron said, like, you make a movie that fits the budget that you have. And you can make a really good movie or an app for almost any budget. You just kind of have to think about what can you do in that budget and how do you make something that works really well for that budget. So with Vibescape, I didn't have $1 million to create an environment, but I've heard from a lot of people that they feel like the environments have created that impression for them of like a huge production value. And it's a lot of fun to figure out tricks. And, so for Vibescape, like, yeah, if you want to check out the video, I'd love that. I want to share more of those as well. But just like real quick, like photogrammetry is you go out and you actually scan from all angles an object and you get a 3D model that
Can you tell me which app you use for it as well? Because I love photography. I've been doing it for years, but with no purpose, just for fun.
So there are a lot of apps out there. And when I posted about this, people were like, use this one, use this one. I use these ones that Apple provided as sample projects for Xcode that you could build. So they were these free apps. I think they're called Object Capture. And you could download the code. And I think now Apple might be putting them out so you could just download them pre-made. So it runs on your iPhone. You basically, if you got a phone with a depth sensor, it works even better. But you take tons of photos from every angle. And then it works with a command line program that was part of that project that Apple put out. And it on a Mac Pro, it takes, maybe 10 minutes to process all that stuff. What you end up with is an actual 3D object on your computer that looks very realistic, and it kind of bakes in the lighting. Fortunately, in the Pacific Northwest, we're just in cloud cover like 90% of the year, so it makes for really good photography conditions. But I found that combining that for stuff that's up close with procedural kind of shader type, this is when you write programs or use shader graphs to create procedural surfaces for the things like ground that are really close to you, where even if you had like an 8K texture, it's going to fall apart if you get too close to it. So it's this mix of procedural shaders for the ground cover. And then I did a lot of just ton of DSLR style photography of the forest, the mountains, stitching that all together to essentially create like a 32K scrim or matte painting. That's the very far background, and then adding in things like particles for mist and all of that, the spatial audio, going out, recording bird sounds and putting them in different places. You're basically building a diorama. If you've ever made one of those in school, it's a high-tech diorama or a set, and you're thinking of, and that was one thing I wanted to touch on, is like, even if you're building a 3D environment, I think narrative and storytelling still are the thing you want to think about, right? With Vibescape, for me, it was all about scanning this stuff and using real details because I wanted everything to be authentic. And it kind of says to your brain, like, I'm in this place, right? So even if you're in a lockdown setting, it's like story still matters, right? It's still about like the narrative of the place you're in.
Exciting too is, so what you've built so far is that you can be in that environment and spend time in that environment. And that's sort of that, like, step one of having this type of tool is just like experiencing it. But what I like, as you're describing it, what I hear is, I'm like, I want to, as we have more tools available, I'd love to be able to like interact in your environment. Have you ever tried the app Cine Tracer? It's available on Steam. It's Windows only, but it runs on Unreal Engine.
No, I haven't tried it.
It's basically for filmmakers planning out a shoot. So you in Unreal Engine, you have all of the standard lighting kit and gaffer tech, and you can build out backgrounds and you can build out environments. But it's mostly meant for like pre-production. So you're planning like, here's your shoot. And I just think about them like, once I have your Pacific Northwest background, being able to like create within it, use it as a backdrop for something else that is embodying that space, like. It's eventually, I would love to see all these different ways, or, because other apps that have done a great job are one where you can just have objects that you pull apart, Jig Space. I want to put my object in your environment and animate it and put a virtual camera in it and do a virtual camera move. And that's my title intro to my YouTube videos. Or, I want to start pulling all these things together that, that's a few steps away. We're not there yet, but it's so, once you're in the space, you start like imagining a million different ways that you're like, wow, I could do so much with a few more tools.
Yeah, to be clear, like for me, I feel like all I've really done so far is hit a technical bar I wanted to hit. I have such a long list of where I want to take it next. I wish I could credit who came up with this idea originally, but you're in these spaces. How do you share them with people? We talked about that earlier, like when they don't actually have one of these things. I think another game did this, but the idea that maybe there's a Leica camera sitting next to you that you could pick up and take a photograph from within the space. I think there's maybe like a whole game based on that concept, but like ideas of like, how do you then...
It's like Pokemon Snap.
Yeah, exactly. Like, I spotted this wild animal in here, or bringing these things to life. The ILM and Marvel collaborated on an app called What If that people have loved. Like that is kind of blown up on the platform, and it's sort of on that multiverse story of theirs, and it's a pretty cool example of storytelling in the medium and combining both that lean back content where you're just watching a segment of video with immersive stuff, and then also the more app type stuff where you have objects that you can interact with. And if you haven't checked that one out, it's fun, and ILM, they are
They know what they're
phenomenal at
doing.
what they do. They know what they're
Yeah.
doing. And I think they pioneered the idea of using Unreal Engine with the volume and stuff. It's funny. I was looking back. I have somewhere on DVD the Lord of the Rings making of content, and Peter Jackson back then, I think, this was like early 2000s, late 90s even, he was using VR to film that cave troll scene when they go down into the mines.
Right.
And they put Peter Jackson in a VR rig with a fake stick for a camera to get in and around. 20 years before any of us, I think, were even thinking about this as a platform. It's fun to go back and look at that. I think, when we talk about low budget, high budget, I'm pretty excited for when Peter Jackson does the equivalent of the Get Back documentary for something like Vision Pro. And, I was thinking the other day of Nirvana's Unplugged concert. And I was thinking, they shot this from a bunch of different angles. Like, could I just go sit in the audience and have them, can Peter Jackson please do that? Because I didn't get to go.
100% seems possible, because I saw you posted about that, and thinking about it, I mean, it's a multicam experience. There's times where you have a swooping crane that is moving across, getting like a really good just spatial scan. And I know that like kind of AI generation would do a very messy job of filling in that background right now, but 2 more years, I think it could do a pretty good job where if you can just throw all that footage and say fill in the gaps, that it might look convincing enough that we don't know the difference, and you can just walk around on stage with Kurt Cobain and it would,
just be in that room. And that comes back to, like, we have no idea what this platform will look like in a couple of years. If you're thinking about whether you should develop for this platform, it comes down to that question of, like, do you prefer to be in a well-established big pond where people have pretty much set all of the constraints by now, or do you like to play at a smaller environment where there's a lot more risk, because who knows what it's going to be like, or whether you'll find a market for your stuff. But it's truly fun to experiment in, and you have this opportunity. Can I give you my pitch?
This is what I would, if I was developing right now, this is what I'd build today, is a podcasting app, spatial podcasting, using 2D tools, so nothing special is required. So, like, let's say we're using this video of us right now. Machine learning can pretty easily isolate each of us, put us on each side of the user's screen. So your work is in front of you, but then we're sitting on both sides. Looks like we're kind of facing each other. Add a little depth effect to our face, so we're like slightly 3D-ish and just floating there. And you can hear the conversation in the same way that the FaceTime calls are, where there's, we are just all in the same room. It's just a podcast. There's nothing crazy different about it, but you are now in the room with, whoever your favorite hosts are. And I mean, some of these like simpler experiences, I think, could immediately be really compelling without even using new cameras, new tools. Just like what's already existing. There's a million ways that we can augment 2D experiences and have something it really does feel new, just by virtue of the technology.
Absolutely. I mean, earlier when I talked about putting older mediums onto the new one, that's actually a really good place to start, right? Like, it's not a negative at all. And you kind of have to start there. But even just with your concept there, it immediately becomes different, right? And suddenly it has this fly on the wall aspect that I'd be really curious to see what that's like, because listening, the old McLuhan thing about the medium is the message. Like, when you're listening to a podcast in AirPods, that gives you a certain kind of read on the experience. Like, being a fly on the wall, seeing two people off to the side, like you're in the cafe and you're just listening to their conversation, would be really fascinating. And I would love to experience that and see what that's like.
I mean, there's so many. I also think about, like, editing 2D projects using these 3D tools would also be compelling. An immediate use for, let's say, a tech reviewer is next time Apple, when they announce a product but it's not available yet, you can download what's the file format? UDZ?
The USD, yeah.
USDZ. You just get a 3D file that you can just drop into your room. But now all of a sudden I have a camera that can see like a high quality camera, which, like, they look pretty good, what comes out of the Vision Pro, and just walk around with it and somewhat interact with it. And, like, create B-roll beauty shots, like things that are totally usable. There's a million ways we could do that, and we're just like we're right on the edge of it. Another thing, I mean, something I've already used once was using Luma AI. Did the intro video for I don't know, I think it was a MacBook review, and I just did I scanned the whole room, created the highest quality I could virtual space of it, and then animated a camera flying into the computer, wrapping around it, and then going up into the ceiling. So it's not something that would be impossible in physical space. Like, it's a real camera move, but it would just be technically impossible. I can't fly a drone in my studio. And I just want to be able to do that. And now putting the glasses on, and I could be in that 3D space, and animating it would be easier because I could interact with it more. Just having ways to generate traditional media by adding Z depth and the interactivity that the Vision Pro brings us. Like, that stuff would immediately be useful. But there's so much development work that needs to be done, and there needs to be user base, and so it's still a step or two away.
Yeah, and JigSpace, definitely when you use that app for the first time, in terms of being able to manipulate objects, because it goes back to your question of what value does it bring as a computing platform, and selling people on whether this should be the next evolution of computing. The desktop flat metaphor that we're all used to works really great for so many things. But then you use something like JigSpace and you pull apart an object, or you interact with it, and you have this aha moment where you're like, there's all these senses we never use when it comes to computers. I know there's a bit of apprehension about that too, because I think, I'm a parent, I'm on my technology a lot more than I'd like to be a lot of times. And so one of my first things is I don't know that I want it to be so much more in my space all the time. It's actually, I found that not to be the case with this. Instead, what I've found is that it opens up just new ways of interacting with things, that for productivity or content creation, whatever it is, there's a lot of new opportunities just based on the fact that we have hands, we have stereo depth perception. Like you said, if you get a virtual product, because you can't fly to Cupertino to see it in real life, but you have this photorealistic thing, you're like, I want to shoot this from this angle because that's my style, and it's that's just suddenly something you could do. You could use a virtual camera in this hypothetical. Obviously we need this app to exist, but it's you have your style of presenting content to your audience, and so you want to show it a certain way, and you can do that virtually. Yeah, it's but again, we're so early with this. It's yeah. That's sort of the underlying thing is, we're defining it as we go as developers, and the stuff that Apple's putting out as well.
Well, especially you're defining it by being there early. So, Gregory, really appreciate both your work developing and coming on the show today. There is still,
thank you so much.
There is a lot to talk about. There is so much more, but obviously we're going to have to let things evolve a little further. So again, check out. Well, actually, where should people check out the most of your work? What's the best place to follow you?
I'll update it too, but if you go to apposite.ai, that's sort of the landing page for all the apps. Dreamweaver on all the socials if you want to follow what I'm up to. And yeah, I'm happy to do this. This was really fun, and hope we can do it again and keep chatting, because I'm really interested to see where you're gonna land with a lot of the stuff, the kind of content you're gonna make with it too.
I just got to get one of those. I got to get an immersive camera somehow, and I've got a million ideas. Oh wait,
yeah. Before
we go, one last thing. I didn't get to touch on this.
Yeah.
Did you watch the trailer for Here, the Tom Hanks, Robert Zemeckis movie?
I did. That kind of came out of nowhere. I didn't know they were working on that, and looks incredible.
Yeah, it looks great. I hadn't heard anything about it, but instantly, I was like, "This is an immersive movie, right?" But it's not. It's just a normal movie. But that is the movie you would make if you wanted the first Hollywood level immersive movie. The camera stays in one place, and it just time passes around the camera. So I don't know the story yet, but I'm like, that's what you would do. This is perfect.
Well, that's interesting, right? Because it's we talked a lot about how do you convey this stuff to people who haven't gone and tried it out yet. And it's interesting when you start to see it go the other direction, and you're like, oh, people are starting to be influenced in these traditional media by what's now possible in these other ones. So yeah, I feel like we'll probably start seeing that a lot more, where you see films where you're like, oh, this would totally make sense as an immersive experience. Or
which is rare. I haven't really seen before. This is the first time it jumped out at me. But then even when I posted about it on Twitter, somebody from the VFX team did kind of respond in there and be like, oh, that would be interesting. I don't think that means anything other than they realize it'd be interesting, but I want that to happen. I don't know. Hopefully I can get my hands on the DaVinci camera somehow. But until then, I'll just.
It's tempting. I know. I'm like, oh man, well, another thing to invest in, but that camera looks pretty exciting.
If I find a place to post the videos that makes sense, I'll probably do it. But it's hard to imagine what that could even be right now, because like if it's just a random app, it's the user base would be so small at first. And then if it's not going to be a big app, that's not what Instagram's going to do next. YouTube's not going to do that. They don't even have their app on the platform. Like where is it going to show up? I have no idea. So there's a big gap still to be filled.
Well, if anyone out there listening wants to buy the camera for me and Tyler to mess around with, we'll make some really cool stuff with it and show you what.
Cool.
Well, thanks so much for having me, Tyler. Great to finally meet you face to face. And
for sure. Yeah. Thanks again, Gregory.